Good evening. The hour of 6:30 p.m. having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Joint Planning Board and the Planning Licenses and Development Committee. This meeting is being broadcast on the City of Keens YouTube channel. The video is also streamed on the city's website and posted on the website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and the board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda items under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Will staff please conduct the roll?
For the Planning Board, Pamela Russell Slack.
Present.
David Orgaz.
Present.
Mayor George Hansel. Councilor Mike Remy. Harold Farrington.
Present.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni.
Present.
Emily Levine Bernier. Armando Rangel. Gail Summers. Tammy Adams. And Kenneth Cost is our newest member, Madam Chair, although he's in the audience today because he hasn't taken his oath of office yet, and he's just here tonight to observe.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then for the PLD side, Kate Bosley,
Present.
Mike Giacomo,
Present.
Phil Jones, Gladys Johnson, Raleigh Omerad.
Present.
So I just wanted to make a quick announcement that we have Councilor Ormerod participating remotely this evening. He has received an authorization through the City Council to attend remotely for the next several meetings. So without any challenge, I would move forward with that at this meeting as well. So
Recording in progress.
Okay, we have a recording in progress. So our first item on our agenda this evening would be the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the May 9th, 2022?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion by Pamela and a second by Councilor Giacomo. Any questions? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All votes are to be done by roll call because we have someone participating remotely this evening. Could the staff please call the roll?
Pamela Russell Slack,
Yeah.
David Orgaz,
Yes.
Harold Farrington,
Yes.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Yes.
Armando Rangel, Kate Bosley,
Yes.
Mike Giacomo,
Yes.
Phil Jones,
Yes.
Gladys Johnson,
Yes.
and Raleigh Omerad.
Yes.
And that is unanimous. So our second item on the agenda then would be the draft proposed changes to the Keene Land Development Code, A, the rural district, and B, conservation residential development subdivisions. And I believe we have a presentation this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I do have a presentation for you. This is Mary Brunner, Senior Planner. Can you hear me?
Mary, could you just move the microphone a little bit closer with the air conditioning on? It's always a little hard to hear.
All right, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Before I just jump into the presentation, though, I wanted to briefly set the stage and just give a little bit of background to why we're here tonight. So staff has been researching the rural district and looking into or exploring the possibility of recommending a change to the minimum lot size. I believe we've given you a couple of updates on that so far. As we've been looking into this and doing research, I think we became more and more convinced that possibly, changing the lot size, reducing it from 5 acres to 2 acres, which is what it was historically, it was a good idea. However, because we're changing the minimum lot size in the rural district, there were some changes that had to be made to the conservation residential development subdivision regulations to be consistent with that lot size change in the underlying zoning district. Once we were getting into the CRD regulations, we found a couple other little tweaks that we thought we should make at the same time. And in addition, we took the opportunity to look into ways that we could promote some of our community's other goals related to, one of them would be land conservation, another one would be renewable energy and the city's goal to transition to 100% renewable energy. And then another goal, which has become a pretty hot topic of conversation recently, is workforce housing. And so we were looking into ways to promote those goals through the CRD regulations. So there's kind of two parts to the recommendations that we're going to be presenting tonight. One is really strictly related to the lot size proposal or recommendation, and then the rest is related to possible changes that we could be making to promote those community goals. So with that, I'm going to go into the presentation.
Madam Chair. Thank you. What was your third goal? I didn't quite catch it.
Workforce housing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Suck that mic.
And I think to do this, I'm going to have to share my screen. Oh, and also a reminder from the, Nick, our AV technician, to use your microphones to make sure they're on whenever you speak. Great. So to start, I'm going to give just a really brief overview of the rural district. The intent statement is up on the screen. This states that the intention of the rural district is to provide for areas of very low density development, predominantly of a residential or agricultural nature. These areas are generally outside of the valley floor, beyond where city water, sewer, and other city services can be readily supplied. This is a map of the rural district. The total land area, so everything shown in green there, is over 14,313 acres of land. This map here shows the extent of city sewer and water. So going back to that intent statement, most of the rural district is beyond where city sewer and water is available. Another sort of quirk of the rural district is this is where we find most of our parcels that have development constraints, like, for example, being landlocked and not having any frontage or not having access. So all the parcels that you see there in orange, which I believe there's 38 of them, 38 are currently undevelopable due to a lack of frontage or access. And that represents about 7.7% of the total land in the rural district by area. The dimensional standards in the rural district, again, are promoting a really low intensity of development. Currently, the minimum lot size is 5 acres. So you need at least 5 acres per dwelling unit without city water or sewer. If you have access to both city water and city sewer, the minimum lot size is reduced to 2 acres. There's not a lot of land in the rural district that has access to both city sewer and water, as I showed on the earlier map. I believe I have the number back over by my desk, but I think there's somewhere around 300 parcels that are within 50 feet of a sewer or water main, but when you try to get both, it greatly reduces that number. The maximum, so the minimum lot width at the building line is 200 feet, and then all of the frontage and all of the setbacks are set at 50 feet currently. The maximum building coverage is 10%, the maximum impervious coverage is 20%, and height is limited to 2 stories or 35 feet. So just digging into parcel size a little bit, there's, if you're looking at strictly properties, there's 1,525 properties in the rural district. However, many of those are actually condos, or Tanglewood is also in the rural district, and each individual manufactured house is its own sub-parcel, so all of those get individually counted. So we took all of those out just to look at actual parcels of land. So actual parcels of land, we have 1,118. Of those, 396 are less than 2 acres. 247 are between 2 and 5 acres. So together, that's 58% of all the parcels. And there's 175 that are between 5 and 10 acres, 189 that are between 10 and 30, and then 111 that are greater than 30%. And the pie chart on the right, again, that shows in the orange, those are the lots that are currently non-conforming with respect to lot size. In the blue are the number of parcels are the number of parcels that conform with respect to lot size. So this is by number of parcels, not land area. This is just another way to visually show those differences in parcel size. Everything in the darkest green are the larger parcels that are over 30 acres. And then as you go to a lighter and lighter color, the parcel size gets smaller. The very lightest green, which is kind of hard to see, is everything that's less than 2 acres. So with that, the first recommendation that staff has is to change the minimum lot size from 5 acres to 2 acres. When we were looking at this, we were really trying to think about the different repercussions that this could have. One of them would be that it would change the number of lots that are non-conforming from 643 to 396. So we'd be decreasing the percentage from 58% to 35%. So we'd be going from a majority being non-conforming to a majority being conforming. I'm just going to pause there. Are there any questions about anything that I've mentioned so far?
Councilor Ormerod, I can see you have your hand up. You're going to have to turn your microphone on. Thank you.
Thank you. Have you got me now? Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. The question I had is there must be some rationale between keeping it at 5 versus 2. For instance, from a conservation standpoint, I know if you're drilling wells and you're looking at the water quality, it's good to have a certain amount of undeveloped land around that. So I'm wondering, how do we know it's okay to go down as a matter of policy with regards to the quality of the wells that need to be drilled there?
Mary?
Yep. Great. Yep. So there is a minimum distance that has to be there that you have to have between your well and your septic. However, assuming the 2-acre lot has enough developable land or area on it, you should be able to easily meet that requirement on a 2-acre lot.
And something else that I would like to point out is that the 2-acre lot used to be our standard. I think you had mentioned that. And then I believe in the 70s, it was changed to 5 acres to slow development, not necessarily for water conservation. So I'm not sure if there would be any additional research that would need to go into that. But
yes, that's my understanding as well. I think Mr. Kopczynski is in the audience, but he has spoken to former Mayor Lane, who recalled that in the late 1970s, he was with the city at that time, and the decision was made to change the lot size from 2 acres to 5 acres as a way to slow growth. So that was part of the reason.
Med, I see you walking toward the microphone.
Yeah, I'm multitasking tonight. I apologize. I've actually talked to former Mayor Lane about this in some depth, and he has suggested that when the time is opportune, he will come and speak.
I'm sorry. Hold on, Med. Sound quality?
Yeah.
Can you tip the microphone towards you, or I don't know if
How's that?
That's much better. Thank you.
Should I sing? I've talked to former Mayor Lane about this in some depth, and he has said that when the time comes, he will come and speak to the committee about the history. And the history that he related to me was in the late 1970s. Keene was very fast growing, and there was a lot of concern about that. And we started having a number of planned unit developments, especially in the rural district, and that's what some of the development that you're seeing now that is being referred to as planned unit developments. And for years, until we changed the zoning code, there were regulations on planned unit developments, but the planning board and the city council decided not to do anymore because of the fostering of growth. And at that time, they changed the underlying standard from 2 acres to 5 acres, primarily to put the brakes on growth. according to Mayor Lane. And he said the intention was, after a very short period of time, they would come back and revisit it, but 50 years later, we're now revisiting it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you for that historical update. Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mary, you talked about a lot of non-conforming. Our definition of non-conforming has always been that something's grandfathered. Are you still using that same definition?
Yep, so there's, you can be legally non-conforming, or, I guess, is it non-legally non-conforming? But most of these are going to be considered legally non-conforming because they either were developed before the minimum lot size was changed to 5 acres, or they were developed under some sort of scenario like the planned unit development, or PUD, that Mr. Kupczynski was just mentioning.
So they are grandfathered then?
Yep, so they're all legally non-conforming. However,
Yes.
it does make it tricky when it comes to wanting to make changes to your property or add on an addition, or I think Mr. Rogers, our zoning administrator, could talk more to that, but there are some challenges. Even if it's a legally non-conforming lot, there can be some limitations because it's non-conforming.
Thank you.
Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at the 396 lots that would remain under 2 acres after we're done here. Could you flip back one slide? Just curious. Okay. So does this map include the condos? I know the numbers didn't include the condos, but does this map?
No, so it only includes the land under them. So for example, well, I don't know if I
Okay,
can,
actually, I think
how
I
to
see
point
the-
to it, but
I
like
think I
there's
see
the
one of the
parcel.
developments there.
Yeah, can you see where
Yep.
Tanglewood is?
Yep, I
You
see
can kind of see all
Tanglewood
the
there.
lines. Yep.
Okay, so the question I had off of that then was, it looks like probably a quarter of those at least, if not more, are in 2 developments. Looks like there's the one development going up north off of, is it Maple Ave maybe, somewhere up there? I don't know if that's the, is it the American Ave neighborhood? Is that, it's hard to tell without any of the streets on there, but it looks like 2 of them are in 2 developments. Is that, I'm guessing that is some of that development that happened, and then we immediately afterwards then changed to the new, the 5-acre lot size. Is that correct, or?
That's my understanding. I'm not sure the timing of the change from the 2 acres to the 5 acres and when we got rid of the PUD option. I think the PUD option might have continued on a little bit longer, although I'm not entirely sure about the timing there. But some of those, yeah, those developments that you see kind of snaking up along like a road, those are pretty much all planned unit developments that occurred back when that was an option.
So it's hard for me to see this as well, but because I'm looking at this map on the screen and I'm trying to associate it with where streets are, but is that lower level of green, is that up off from Eastern Ave? There, it looks like down in the bottom left-hand corner.
Can you see my cursor?
Yep, right there, yep.
I don't know. I'd have to zoom in, to be honest.
I'm looking at a map, and that looks to me to, so those are just non-conforming
Looks like
house lots
Marlborough
that would
Street.
continue to be non-conforming.
It looks like those might be between 2, actually on this map, it's between 2 and 10 acres. So I
Okay.
think those might become conforming with this
Oh,
Those would
proposed
be
change.
becoming conforming.
Okay, I'm
It's
sorry.
the
Can you
lighter
point-
green. It's really hard to see. So this map, and I apologize, it's very hard to see. It was really meant more to be a quick illustration of where
Right.
the sizes
Sorry,
are. We can, for the public workshop, if you'd like, I can try to get a more detailed map. It'll probably have to be sections of the city, though, just so that we can zoom in a little bit more to see those streets.
Yeah, that's fine. Could you just identify with your cursor where those few non-conforming lots would maintain?
So like in here,
Okay,
that's the really light green. This is the really light green right here, this like S shape.
Okay.
There's some up in this top northeast corner.
okay.
Yeah, there's a few kind of
pockets.
It's very hard to see, I apologize.
Okay.
We can also do, one thing I can do is do it on a dark gray background so it'll stand out more.
Okay.
Yep.
I will also withdraw my question because I misread their map. I was looking at that second level of green, not
Right.
the lightest.
Okay.
And so
yep.
was I, and so
Yeah.
was I, Counselor. So
So-
I definitely can understand. It's hard, and maybe even use just a completely different contrasting color for us, to identify.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
I'm sorry.
So I just want to go back, and maybe you can answer this, but what's the population of Keene now? Around? I don't think we're at 24,000.
No, we're just over 23,050 or 100, something like that.
I don't, about 24, John, you think? Yeah, it's about that. It's 23.8, 23.9, something
The reason I
like that.
brought that up was back in 2017, 2018, the population in Keene was about 23,400 and something.
Yeah.
So at that time, that was when we put that into place to, about the lots, to go from 2 to 5. Now, we're in reverse, but I think what's on the table, what people need to remember is we're doing this for a specific reason.
Right.
And the reason being is we're trying to find a way to create some type of workforce housing. So that you'll be able to create different buildings on a particular lot, even though we're limited, it seems, on, because the lots are so non-conforming and we're running into other areas. But the reason I ask that is because the population since 2017 really has not changed that much.
Right.
So I just think people need to keep that in mind.
Well, and I would also like to point out that when we did our ward redistricting, there were shifts in our ward boundaries because the population in Ward 1 had been significantly reduced. I'm sorry, Ward 2 had been significantly reduced because we had seen a lower census in the college, I believe. And what that indicated is though our population may have been stagnant, what we have are less college students here, but more, working people trying to find housing, which is why we see this housing problem. So we just can't sustain any more individuals living in the city at the capacity that we're at currently.
Thank you, Matt.
Roberta?
If someone were to build decide to build on a new lot currently, are they not allowed to go under a 5-acre lot? I mean, they can still,
In the rural district, that's correct,
so they need that 5-acre lot. That's a lot.
for one unit.
And the other thing is, might be a little off topic, but just looking down the road into the future, we go to 2-acre lots. I just wonder how the whole taxation, how that will play out over time for the city.
Well, I think that it will benefit the city financially because you will have more housing capacity, and a developed lot is going to be more taxable than an undeveloped lot.
Maybe overall the
Could lower, yeah, it could actually impact it and lower it. A benefit to everyone, for sure. I do think we're going to see lots of different opportunities for different types of development that we could see potentially with these changes. Are there any other questions, or are you ready to continue, Mary? Thank you.
Yes, if there's no more questions about the proposed lot size change. All right, so as I mentioned, if we are to move forward and recommend this change from 5 acres to 2 acres in the rural district, that means that we have to go into our conservation residential development, which I will here on out refer to as CRD, subdivision regulations to be consistent. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview of the CRD subdivision regulations and then what we're proposing. So I put up on the slide the purpose. This comes straight from the LDC, and also an image that shows an example of a tract of land on the top that's developed under a conventional subdivision, and on the bottom it's developed under a conservation subdivision. So really the purpose of a conservation subdivision, CRD subdivision, is to promote the conservation of natural resources while providing with greater flexibility and creativity in the design of a residential development than would otherwise be allowed under the conventional zoning and subdivision practices. So basically, if you're going to subdivide a tract of land using conventional subdivision practices, as a developer, you're looking at that tract of land, probably the first thing you're looking at is, can I do this without having to build a road, because a road is very expensive. And then once you figure that out, you're looking at how can you maximize the number of lots, because that's where you get your return on investment. You have a minimum lot size in your underlying zoning district, and so usually it's a game of trying to divide it up in a way that you get the most lots that you can sell. With the conservation subdivision option, the process that they would go through is they start with that tract of land, they identify what's called primary conservation areas, so areas like wetlands and steep slopes and natural springs, things like that, that you really don't want anyone to build on, or really you can't build on. They set that all aside into conservation, at least 50% of the land area. However, they should be able, in return, they get flexibility with the dimensional requirements. So their minimum lot size gets decreased, setbacks, things like that. So they can fit the same number of units as they could have under a conventional subdivision. And what this does is it provides developers with flexibility so that they can work around those natural development constraints without forcing them to lose out on units that they could be developing or lots that they could be dividing. So that wasn't the most elegant explanation, but hopefully the images helped me out there. Are there any questions about what the CRD is? Oh, go ahead.
I'm seeing none.
I think Councilor Giacomo.
Councilor Giacomo.
Do we have any currently?
Yes, we have, well, to my knowledge, there's at least one that was approved in the past. I wasn't here when it was approved on, it's like the Darling Court Extension. And then we actually have an application that's coming before the Planning Board this month. One thing, so we've had the CRD regulations on the books for quite some time. We just recently modified them as part of the Land Development Code, made the process a lot simpler and a lot easier to go through, and we also made it a little bit more of an attractive option, so our hope is that we'll see more of these come through.
Thank you.
So the slide that's up here right now is just to kind of orient you to the terminology that we use in the CRD regulations. So when I'm referring to the tract, I'm referring to the parent parcel or the starting piece of land. The lots are the proposed new lots as part of the subdivision. The open space is the land that's permanently reserved as open space, and that's including all primary conservation areas. And again, primary conservation areas are wetlands, surface waters, slopes that are greater than a 25% grade, floodways, and springs. So these are all areas where you can't develop anyways. So those are the primary conservation areas. So why is this a good idea? Or why do we need it in Keene specifically? What I have showing on the screen is the rural district, and overlaid, and it looks really messy, I apologize, is the wetlands and steep slopes shown in orange. And I do have this in dark gray. I'm not sure if I couldn't decide which one was easier to see, so I included both. But the dark gray, you can really see, I think the colors pop a little bit more. But the orange are slopes greater than 25% grade, so you are prohibited from doing any development on those slopes in Keene. The wetlands are areas that you have to stay out of as well, and there's a buffer around them. If you go within that buffer, you have to get a conditional use permit from the planning board. So these are some of the natural development constraints, and you'll see that in the rural district, there's a lot of steep slopes. This slide shows the steep slopes overlaid with the lot size map. I know it's very messy and busy and probably can't see anything, but the point I wanted to make here is that the really large tracts of land that we have left, there's a reason why they're left. They have steep slopes, they have landlocked parcels, they have wetlands and other development constraints on them. So really, if somebody wanted to develop a parcel like that, they would need to use an option like CRD so that they can have a little bit more flexibility in how they design their development. So this slide, and I'm not going to read all these numbers, this slide just shows the dimensional requirements that we have in our regulations today for CRDs. Two numbers that I wanted to point out for the rural district. Right now, for a CRD, if you wanted to do one of these, you would have to have at least 10 acres. So the tract has to be at least 10 acres in size. As we saw earlier, there's a very large number of parcels in the rural district that are less than 10 acres. So this really is only an option for the parcels that are at least 10 acres or larger. And right now, the minimum lot size is 1 acre. And so again, that's because if you have a parcel of land and you're putting 50% of it into conservation, you have to reduce the lot size in order for a developer to be able to fit the same number of units onto that remaining piece of land. So right now it goes down from 5 acres to 1 acre.
Counselor Jones?
Mary, can you go back one slide, please?
Yes.
One more, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Steep slopes.
You want one more, Counselor?
We have different, in our steep slopes ordinance, we have different grades. And what are you referring to as a steep slope here? What grade?
This is the prohibitive, so it's 25% or greater. That's actually a great point because I'm not showing precautionary slopes, which are between 15 and 25% grade. You can do some limited development on precautionary slopes, but it's limited. I think you can only do up to 20,000 square feet of impact per parcel.
I remember
Yeah.
doing that ordinance. I've turned my mic down, sorry.
We heard you, Bill.
All right. So this next slide is talking about our current density and open space requirements. Right now, so this is actually one of the things that we changed with LDC. Previously, to determine density, we had a very long, arduous process that you had to go through to develop what's called a yield analysis plan. So you would actually, the developer had to pretend that they were doing a conventional subdivision, go through all the cost of surveying the entire tract of land and pretending that they were about to develop it as a conventional subdivision in order to calculate how many units they could get. And then they would re-go through that whole process and develop a CRD plan. This, we decided to get rid of that process because it added a whole extra meeting and a lot of time and expense. Instead, we've gone to using what's called density factors, which is much simpler. It's just a simple math exercise. You take the total area of the tract, you divide it by the density factor, and that's the maximum number of units that you're allowed. Right now, the density factor is equal to the underlying density of the zoning district for low density and low density 1, but you actually get a bit of a density bonus in rural. Again, rural, the minimum lot size is 5 acres. However, the density factor is 4 acres if you put 50% into open space, or it's 3 acres if you put 60% into open space. So you get a density factor off the bat of going from 5 to 4, and then you get even a further density bonus if you put at least 60% of the land into conservation. I put a couple of examples up here to show like the impact that this might have. So for example, if you have a 13-acre lot in the rural district under a conventional subdivision, you can get a maximum of 2 units. Under a CRD, theoretically, depending on how much land you put into conservation, you could get 3 or 4 units. Now this is not taking into account development constraints like steep slopes and wetlands and surface water buffers and things like that. So this is theoretically, here's the maximum number of units that you can get if you can find a way to make it work. And then finally, what I wanted to talk about, this is still the overview of our CRD regulations. We also added in with the LDC update a little bit more flexibility in the type of housing that's allowed. So in the underlying zoning districts for low density 1 and rural, you can only do single family. Under a CRD, you can do single family or 2 family, or if you're in the low density district, you can do multifamily with a maximum of 6 units per structure. So we give more flexibility that way as well. The open space uses are limited to conservation, agriculture, forestry, or passive recreation. All right, so the first recommendation that staff has is really related to just being consistent with the proposed change in lot size. So we're proposing to go from a density factor of either 4 or 3 acres to just 2 acres. So the density factor would match the underlying zoning district in terms of density. In addition, we think this was a glitch, but in our submission requirements, even though we don't use the yield analysis plan anymore, we still require them to submit one. Now, the applicant can request an exemption from submitting one, but we just felt since we're already in the CRD regulations, we should just correct that and remove that requirement. So we're proposing also to remove the requirement to submit a yield analysis plan since we now use the density factor method to determine total number of units. Are there any questions about this proposed change? Okay.
Excuse me?
Oh, sorry,
Maybe-
Counselor Ormerod.
Thank you. This is really good. It's very thorough. I'm trying to figure out how this solves the landlocked problem that we have. Are we just requiring the developers to build roads?
So the landlocked problem is a bigger issue that this is not going to solve. That's something that will have to be solved either by, it depends on if the issue is frontage or access, but that's a bigger issue that this wouldn't be able to solve.
And also, there could be opportunities if some of the adjacent properties to infrastructure become developed, then there could be road infrastructure built that might make some of the landlocked properties accessible, but that would be, there's nothing we can do to incentivize that, I don't think.
All right. One follow-up question, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
Is merging some of the lots strategically to provide that an option at some point, or is that just too onerous a process?
My understanding would be that would be between the landowners. I'm sure that a landowner could approach an adjacent landowner with an option like that, but that wouldn't be anything that we could work with an assumption that we could have something like that happen here. Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as with the CRD, I think there's certainly some incentives there that if somebody has one of the larger tracts out in the rural district that is landlocked, this might give them the incentive, because they can build enough units, that it might incentivize them to go to the abutting property owner and possibly purchase something. And a larger CRD project could very well require the developer to build roads and bring utilities into that space. So I think the incentive could drive a lot of other development as opposed to just 1 and 2 family.
Thank you. Pamela? Oh, Med?
Great questions and great answer. The lot merger process is actually fairly simple. If memory serves me, it's a trip to the planning board, just saying, hey, we're merging these 2 lots, and then creating the records down in the assessing office. And then, as John is saying, if it's within the new property owner's LLC or however they want to put it together, to then further develop it, put in roads, driveways, whatever the case may be, that's perfectly appropriate. But, it's been stated that, this is zoning. We're talking about zoning, use of the land. I think later on we'll have to have some conversations about road frontage and road standards and things which are in other places in the code. But the ability to merge, as Councilor Ormerod has said, is actually fairly simple.
Great, thank you. Councilor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also still looking back at those maps, but the landlocked made me think about it. Do we know how many of those properties that are A, landlocked, or B, even part of the rural district, are currently already fully in conservation, whether it be private in conservation? I'm thinking Horatio Colony, that whole area is all rural district, it looked like. And then all the land that Keene owns. I mean, Keene owns an extraordinary amount of land in its borders. And some of that I believe is quite a bit of it is in conservation already, and so probably pulling it back out is a nightmarish process that likely won't happen. Mm-hmm. So of the properties that are available, do we know how much is probably not going to be pulled off and developed anytime soon because it is already in conservation or owned by the city?
So my understanding is that most of the properties that the city owns that are in conservation are actually zoned conservation.
So they're not appearing on our maps?
Yeah, no, there's those gaps in the rural district that are out where you would expect the rural district to be. Those are either agriculture or conservation.
Okay, I assumed they were agriculture, all right, conservation, that makes more sense.
But there probably are some parcels in the rural district that are zoned rural that have been put into conservation. I don't know if we necessarily have all of that data handy, but I can certainly ask.
Probably not important enough, but thank you. I'm curious
Right.
if you had it off the tip of your fingers, if not, not a huge deal, but just something else I was thinking of. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going.
All right. And then the last recommendation is to change the minimum lot area from 1 acre to 32,000 square feet, which is just under 3/4 of an acre. And I also put up there the tract size of 10 acres in red with a question mark. I think staff kind of discussed this a little bit, and we decided to start by recommending that we keep the tract size at 10 acres, but I just put up there as a question in case, it's something that we could discuss. I certainly wouldn't necessarily recommend going all the way down to 5 acres, which is the minimum tract size for low density and low density 1. But just wanted to raise a question if the group felt strongly about lowering the minimum tract size, given the fact that many lots are lower than 10 acres.
Do you have any examples of what type of, if at 10 acres you would have this many units available, and at 7 acres you'd have this many units available to you?
Well, if we change the minimum lot size to 2 acres under a conventional zoning, you would be able to get, at 10 acres, you'd be able to get 5 units maximum, not including any constraints. Under 7 acres, you'd currently be able to get, or with the 2 acre minimum, you'd be able to get 3 units. With the CRD, it would be the same, because we're proposing to change the density factor to be the same. However, later on in the presentation, I'll talk about a third recommendation, which is to include options to get a density bonus. So that could change the math a little bit there.
Counselor Jones?
Thank you. Can I just ask, and maybe John or Med would remember this, or even Pam, 12 years ago when we were writing our master plan, we were of a different mindset back then. We wanted more open space, more green space, more rural land. And I see why we're doing this now because of the times. But does this contradict our master plan? I didn't bring my copy of the master plan tonight. But
No, that's a really great question. I think that's why we're tying this all to the CRD regulations, because with the CRD subdivision option, it really is promoting, the protection and the conservation of those sensitive natural areas that are so important. But I do think, lowering the minimum lot size is opening up a little bit more opportunity for development in the rural district, which is outside the area where city infrastructure is located, and our master plan does sort of emphasize that development should be concentrated as much as possible where city infrastructure is provided. Personally, I don't think it contradicts the master plan because we have the CRD option out there that we're requiring for subdivisions of 3 or more lots that meet the minimum requirements. They have to do a CRD subdivision, which means that we're protecting those environmentally sensitive areas.
that was a good answer.
Counselor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, coming back to, it's a can of worms, okay? But coming back to our homelessness problem.
Counselor Johnson, is your microphone on?
Oh, yeah, it's on, but it's not by my mouth. There it should be. Thank you. In relationship to our homelessness needs, can they be fit in some of those external areas so that it would be managed?
So I don't think that this proposal will directly impact the homeless population, mostly because what we're proposing to do is create more opportunity for subdividing in the rural district to create developable lots. But unless it's subsidized housing or there's some incentive, developers aren't going to be building housing that's affordable to low-income folks on their own, if that
you.
makes sense, just because of
Right.
market conditions and what they need to do to cover their own costs for developing.
But what I
Um,
would like to point out, Counselor Johnson, is that, the economics of the situation is that we have a supply and demand issue currently. And so there are a lot of families who might live in the center of town in apartments who are not able to find affordable housing, and we're trying to create opportunities for that, which would shift some of the burden off from our central downtown and our apartment housing stock to make some more availability for people, who are in a transitional phase, or, create opportunities for buildings to maybe become available to serve different uses, group homes or shelters or some of the other types of uses that we've made allowances for in our new land development code as well. Matt, did you have a
I don't think I
response?
can improve on either answer, so I'm going to go sit back down.
Keep coming up to join us,
Yeah,
though.
we like having you.
Do you wanna
Yes,
say-
Counselor Johnson?
Thank you. And one other question. What's the total amount of people that could potentially live in a 2-acre spot versus the 5-acre?
Well, so right now, the density factor is per dwelling unit, so we're talking about one family is
Okay.
one dwelling unit. Now, you can do, there's provisions in our regulations for if you have a single-family dwelling unit, you can have an accessory dwelling unit, so it gets in, it's not a clear-cut yes or no, or this is the right answer, but in general, right now, on 5 acres, you can only have one dwelling unit. In the rural district, we're proposing to reduce that down to 2. And then with the CRD option, they have the option to go up to a 2-family home instead of just a single family.
So you could potentially quadruple the amount of housed families on the same size lot as prior.
And that's my concern. If we have 4 different kind of families living in a small area, it can allow itself to perhaps not be as well kept.
Well, we currently have communities in our city that have lot sizes of 1/4 acre,
Okay.
where we see, and those
Okay.
those manage just fine, I think. So we can't look that far into solving the problem of how people would manage their private residences. But I definitely think it wouldn't take far. I mean, I think a lot of our communities, the Maple Ave development is a good example. I'm not sure if we know what the lot size there is, but I bet it's probably close to 1/4 acre or 1/2 acre lot size. And that's a beautiful neighborhood. Lots of our neighborhoods downtown don't even reach that. And, I think there's an opportunity to have a really attractive functional uses be put into some of these lots.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions before we move forward? Okay. All right.
So now I'm getting into the part of the presentation where we're sort of branching off from the lot size question into the community goals. So staff's next recommendation is to create what we're kind of internally referring to as a menu of incentives within the CRD regulations that a developer could choose from in order to get a density bonus, but in return, they'd be helping the city reach one of its community goals. Under this scenario, the minimum lot size within a CRD would be waived because if you increase the maximum allowable units, you'd have to reduce the minimum lot size, and rather than going through the math for every possible scenario, we figured it's going to regulate itself through, they still have to be on individual lots, and they would still have to meet setbacks and all of that. So we're not allowing people to put the houses right on top of each other, but waiving the minimum lot size just makes the most sense if we're going to be allowing for density bonuses. And also, the overall maximum allowable density would be capped at 30%, so you could not go above that number. So the first option that we're proposing to include in this menu is the open space density incentive. So if a developer agrees to put at least 65% of the area of the tract and conserve it permanently as open space, they would get a density bonus of 10% or 1 unit, whichever is greater. So they'll always get at least 1 unit from doing this density bonus, but if it's a larger piece of land, they'll get more than 1 unit out of this density bonus, if that makes sense. That's the most, I think, simple one to explain, so I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions about what we're proposing to do with that.
I'm going to jump ahead, and can they combine these?
Yes, and so that would be additive. So let's say somebody does all 3. They wouldn't be able to go above 30%, but it would be
Okay.
30% of what you were allowed to get under the base calculation with the density factor.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions yet.
Okay, the next 2 I have additional slides to explain because they're a little bit more to explain. So the second option is a solar density incentive. With this one, a developer would have to meet specific criteria for solar. In return, they'd get a density bonus of 10% or 1 unit, whichever is greater. And then the third menu item is workforce housing density incentive. So for this one, at least 20% of the development has to be workforce, and I put a star there because we want to talk about what workforce means in a minute. The density bonus would be 15% or 1 unit, whichever is greater. And in addition, for the rural and low density 1, we're proposing to have more flexibility in the housing type as an added bonus on top of the increased density. And the reason for that is because we were concerned with the workforce housing incentive that a 10% bonus wouldn't be enough of an incentive on its own for developers to actually use that option. So we can go into this a little bit more. So for the solar density incentive, I think to explain this, I included a little graphic on here. So this whole option is based on the premise that the ideal orientation for a building is to be, for a building to harvest solar energy is to be oriented within 5 degrees of true south. Although placement within 30 degrees of that still garners a considerable solar contribution.
So, Mary, we've lost our visuals.
Nick, if you're listening, is that something you're able to fix?
Oh, I see. It's coming back.
Okay, all right.
It's like magic.
Sorry about that. So aligning a house so that it's oriented within 5 degrees of true south, combined with design features such as thermal mass material and the installation of glazed southern-facing windows, can reduce the heating costs for homeowners by as much as 25%, and that's without even installing solar PV. Further, if you're installing solar panels on your roof, you want them to face south. If they're on an east or west-facing roof, they will return approximately 20% less energy than south-facing panels. And then if you have them facing north, you might as well not install them. So that's the whole premise behind this option. So under this option, the first criteria is that at least 50% of the lots have to be oriented, or have to be called solar-oriented. And a solar-oriented lot shall mean a lot with its longest lot dimension oriented to within 30 degrees of a true east-west line. So basically, the lot has to be designed so that the longest dimension is running east-west so that you could build a house with a south-facing roof on it. It's encouraging having a building with a south-facing roof. In addition, to the extent feasible, lots are designed so that it would be easy to site a structure which is unshaded by other nearby structures, and so as to allow for owner control of shading. This one is a little bit confusing, but basically what it's saying is that the developable portion of the lot is located in an area where the owner could control the shading of the house. So they could decide if there's an evergreen tree blocking their solar resource, they could cut it down because it's on their own property and not on their neighbor's property, for example. or they could have control over what, if any structures get built on the south side of their house. It's not dictating where a house has to be built, but just saying it would be possible to build a house in a location that the owner could control those factors. In addition, the long axis of all dwelling units on solar-oriented lots shall be oriented so that the long axis faces within 20 degrees of true south, and at least 4 kilowatts of solar PV shall be installed for each dwelling unit on a solar-oriented lot. So 50% of the lots have to be solar-oriented. All of the dwelling units on those lots have to have at least 4 kilowatts of solar PV installed. And that would be a condition of approval. So that would be handled obviously after the subdivision goes through. So that would have to be something that's included in the conditions of approval from the planning board. And then finally, the last proposed criteria is that the roads, to the extent feasible or possible, should be oriented east-west as well. So all of this is really, again, trying to promote development where the owners can take advantage of solar energy. And at least 50% of the lots have to actually have solar energy installed.
Counselor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I've got my mic on this time. I would think, I got so excited about having my mic on, I think I forgot what it was. It would seem as if, no, I know, are the panels, the solar panels going to be on the roof, or are they going to be freestanding?
They could be either. It's not saying, it could be a ground-mounted array, it could be on the roof. That's really up to the owner to decide, or the developer if they're building the building. Yeah.
Counselor Jones, did you have a question?
No, I was just saying they just have to meet the kilowatt
Oh, okay, yes, exactly.
count, that's all.
Counselor Ormerod?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everyone knows I love solar, and I think this is great, and it's incentivization. But if we're requiring 50% of them to actually install solar, are we being solar bullies, or where did that 50% requirement come from?
Yep, so this is optional. We're not requiring anyone to install solar, but if they do, they get a density bonus because they're helping us reach our renewable energy goal as a community.
Thank you. And so that bonus kicks in at 50%? Is that, do I understand that correctly?
Yep, so if a developer is able to demonstrate that they can meet all of these criteria, or they can guarantee that they will meet these criteria, then they get a permanent density bonus because they're able to subdivide and add additional units to their development. And the idea behind that is those additional units that they're able to sell will offset the cost of installing the solar to some extent.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. So that addresses my question of the logic of the 50%. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about solar? Okay.
Okay. The third option is the workforce housing density incentive. So what I have up on the screen right now is the state definition of workforce housing, which comes from the Workforce Housing Statute, RSA 674-58 through 61. So that statute states that housing is considered affordable. For sale housing is considered affordable to a household of 4 earning up to 100% of the area median income, and rental housing that is affordable to a household of 3 earning up to 60% of the area median income. And I put those values up on the screen for Cheshire County just for reference. So basically the Cheshire County workforce housing purchase and rent limits are $303,000 for a purchase price. So if you're a family of 4 and you're considered workforce, then your affordable purchase price is $303,000. And then if for a family of 3, the affordable rental, gross monthly rental, so that's including utilities, would be $1,130 per month. So that's what the state definition and those values are for Cheshire County for 2021, based on the HUD 2021 area median income.
Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are we assuming that all four of them are working? Like, oh my gosh. I mean,
I'm
the median household income is 65K for Cheshire County. I don't know how you afford 303,000 on 65. I know this is the state, this isn't you guys, but my gosh. Okay.
So HUD does make some assumptions, but I would have to say that the 60% of the 2021 HUD medium area income adjusted for a family of 3 is a 2-bedroom.
Yeah, I believe that's for a 2-bedroom, yep.
Yeah, the rental made sense.
Just the
purchase
purchase
one,
one.
I mean, if you do the math out, just back of my scratch paper here, with Keene's tax rate,
Right.
a $303,000 house, you're looking at, you need to be making 70K.
Right.
So
I'm sure that
means your entire
they,
household income is going to pay for your house with nothing left over for growth. Anyways, it seems crazy. That's all.
yes. Hello.
I just want to say one thing here. One of the programs that the county, you can get it through the county, but it's called the First Time Home Buyer Program. That mortgage goes out for 40 years. It is at an extremely low interest rate. And this offers a family like that the capability of being able to purchase that home. So that's the first thing. The other thing here, and that's not the only program that's available. I'm just throwing one out there. The other programs that are available that we have not spoken about are housing vouchers. Now, I know there's a long list to obtain a housing voucher, but you can also, there are people that already have, and these are this is workforce housing. And a lot of families already have a housing voucher. That housing voucher is also based on your income, and what that can do is it reduces the amount of rent that you pay per month. There is a waiting list, but it's available there throughout the state. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that even though we're seeing this amount on here, there is a possibility that they could apply for a housing voucher. And it's been my experience that a lot of, and I'm going to kind of address this to you a little bit, Gladys, because I do a lot of work with the homeless, and many of the families that are homeless are actually, it's workforce housing. Many of them have their jobs. Many have jobs. Both parents have jobs. Even a single parent might be working 2 or 3 jobs. The problem is that the majority of families are living from paycheck to paycheck, and that's the problem. They don't have a savings account. There isn't a way for them to bounce back. But there are a lot of advantages to working, trying to apply for a first-time home buyer program. It's a step-by-step process. And honestly, I'm going to tell you, that's how I bought my house in Keene. Because if you face a divorce and you lose everything, this is a program that you can that's fairly easy to qualify for if you follow the steps.
And just to piggyback on that as well, in the work that I'm in the real estate rentals that that I've worked with, and understanding how the housing voucher programs work, what Pamela said is absolutely correct. But the problem is that it's not that these families can't necessarily always get access to a voucher, but there are many people who have immediate access to vouchers who cannot get access to apartments. And that's the real issue, is that even our local housing authority has sent out letters recently asking to clean up their list, asking people to, put their best effort forward to try to obtain some sort of suitable living situation. And if they can't, then they're going to move to the next person on the list. But those lists are just going to continue to rotate because there is no housing for anyone to obtain. And to create opportunities where landlords might be incentivized to rent to folks who have vouchers available to them is really important. And I think that the staff's done a good job of trying to come up with some options for us. I love the menu idea, and that they can combine these and create density bonuses, because you have to give developers a reason to jump through some of these hoops and to create opportunities for people. And when people call me looking for a rental, a lot of times they say, would you accept a voucher? Because a lot of landlords might just say, no, we don't accept vouchers. And that's problematic. But I think if you have a developer who's interested in this item, they would be incentivized, and there's some sort of mechanism to monitor that happens, that there is a percentage of the units potentially. I'm assuming this is going to be looking probably more at some sort of development that has multiple units structured on a site,
Well, it could be either,
or
but.
from the rental option.
But from the rental option, yeah, that's part of the reason that we're proposing to increase the flexibility in housing type for this option.
Okay.
Yep.
Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my concern here is just using the 100% of the area and median income value. The first-time home buyer's credit has a maximum house price, which is under $303,000. So if a developer could come in, put in a series of $303,000 houses, first-time home buyers wouldn't even be eligible for those. The maximum, like I just checked, is $268,000. So I can appreciate that the shortage in housing, absolutely. I want to encourage all the development we can, but I think if we're going to encourage workforce housing, let's make sure it's actually workforce housing we're encouraging. And I think to do that, using that 100% number is just too high. And thank you for doing the next slide, because there we go. Thank you, Mary.
That was,
Right
thank
on
you.
top.
Coming to the rescue.
For the perfect segue to the next slide. If I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the point that Councilor Giacomo just brought up is one of the pieces of feedback that we really wanted to hear from you today. I think the first one was really if there's general support for the whole idea of having a menu of incentives included in the CRD in the first place. But then I think the next big piece of feedback that we would be looking for today is how we should be defining workforce as a community. So what I've included on this slide are a few different values going from 80%, 100%, and 120% based on the 2021 HUD median area income affordable purchase price for Cheshire County. And I should say, this is based on, for a family of four, and it's the estimated maximum price using 30% of income, 5% down payment, 30-year mortgage at 2.88%, 0.7 points, PMI estimated 2021 taxes for the area, and hazard insurance. The interest rate is the average of the 30-year Freddie Mac interest rate for January through March 2021. Now, as somebody who recently bought a house, that is not necessarily realistic, those numbers that I just spouted off. I think that's really going back to the idea that affordable housing is when you're spending 30% or less of your income on housing, but realistically getting a mortgage with 5% down, 30-year mortgage, 2.88% interest rate, that's not something that people can even get right now. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers. But based on those parameters, 100% of the HUD median area income affordable purchase price is estimated to be $303,000. If we go down to 80%, it goes down to $242,500. Or we could even go the other way and go up to 120%, which is $363,600. So just some numbers to throw out there, and I'd be really interested to hear everyone's feedback if you think we should be consistent with the state definition. If we want to go lower, we can. There are other communities out there that have gone lower than what the state definition has said because they had a similar reaction as Councilor Giacomo that, oh, wow, what's considered workforce at the state level really isn't affordable for a working family in our region. However, the consideration there is to make sure, if we go too low, then we really have to be providing a pretty big incentive for a developer
That
to
would
be
have
able
been
to do it. Yeah, so
my
it's kind of-
acknowledgement. It's a balancing act. I mean, you ultimately have to create an economic opportunity for a developer to want to do this. And the more you push down that top end of the purchase price of the finished developed property, and unless you create a density bonus that's significant enough to make up and then some their loss of selling that at market rate, what would be the incentive to do that? So I think that we really need to look at that mathematically. Councilor Jones?
Thank you. We just seem to be addressing one segment of the population. There's the economic development part that we have to also look at, I think. I mean, I was talking to hospital administrators, they can't get doctors to come to town because
Correct.
they don't have housing. I was talking to the HR director for a precision technical company in Keene. They're willing to put an addition onto their building, but they need 30 new engineers, but they can't get them because they don't have housing.
Correct.
And we should have an incentive for that segment also, because that's the economic development part of it.
So I would agree, and 100%. I think there is not a demographic in our community that is not being hurt by this housing shortage.
You're right.
But I think that the incentive is going from 5 acres to 2 acres. In that, the engineers, the doctors, the professionals are going to be able to afford a built home on a 2-acre lot. The developer would have doubled their amount, potentially on a 10-acre lot, more than doubled their amount of developable lots, which would incentivize housing production at that level. I think and why wouldn't you build those houses that you can sell for $400,000, for $500,000? If where we really need to sweeten the deal a little bit, I think, is in this category. Although I 100% agree with you, Councilor Jones, there is not there are no available properties in our area.
And
Pamela?
Madam Chair, if I can add to
Counselor
that.
Jones, I totally agree with you, and I don't see why there wouldn't be any reason why we couldn't add something in that as some type of an incentive for a company. I mean, it's not just the one you were talking about. There are several companies that are unable to get employees to come here because they can't find a place to live. And we're not just talking about Keene, we're talking about the towns as well.
Planner? I'm sorry, I'm not sure your first name.
That's okay. Evan Clements, planner.
Thank you.
So just to tack on a little bit to that, the solar-oriented density bonus is more likely to generate higher quality dwelling units. The solar system is going to cost anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000 additional dollars. So there might be a higher market end user for that. And then just to kind of clarify, you mentioned $400,000 to $500,000 houses for that higher market. Currently, right now for sale on Zillow, there are a couple 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2 attached garage, about 2,200 square feet, new construction. Those are going anywhere from $470,000 to $490,000 right now. They're on postage stamp lots, and the workforce housing option would be, those are bare bones dwellings, single family detached. Those aren't coming with marble countertops or fancy amenities. That's just about as basic as it gets. So as we talk about trying to find that balance, like you said, that $300,000 number is already challenging, because if the market is already pushing for an almost $500,000 house, we're almost at 3 to 1. You need 3 market rate units to pay for 1 workforce housing unit. And that's just hard. It's hard to figure it out. So just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think that mathematical equation has to be played out, and I think we're going to have to see some examples of that and what that really looks like, so that we can make logical decisions about what those bonuses should be in that category. Pamela?
Mary, I just have a question. Is there a way to be able to add something in this in the way of an incentive for a business if they wanted to create some workforce housing? Or I see Med slowly coming up. Thank you, Med.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think we can look at almost anything, but, when you're talking about a business that's, let's say, down on Marlborough Street, and you're talking about land that's north of the highway on the way to Gilsum or something like that, where, rural is going to be. I'm not quite sure how you connect those two together unless they're involved actually in the development scheme. I think what Mary's talking about in general with this chart is really creating our own definition of workforce for the purposes of the density bonus. It could be 180%, it could be 200%, it could be whatever number seems reasonable to make the math work, to add the incentives, to add the units, to make it worthwhile to build units that are specifically set aside for workforce, either purchase or rental, right? Either one. We intend as staff to be bringing on a regular basis ideas on increasing housing density throughout the city. This is just the rural district right now that we're talking about. This is just one district. Whether or not it makes sense to have housing units that are attached to existing businesses is probably worthy of a discussion. There's some connotations about factory housing and things like that we'll have to get over. But I do think having businesses address whether or not they want to have attached units or units close by, I think makes perfect sense. I think if you're working at one of our manufacturers and there's a nice upscale apartment that's reasonably close, perhaps even on the property, I think that makes an awful lot of sense to have that conversation. The mayor and I have had conversations with the Dartmouth-Hitchcock system related to their recent purchase of the former Liberty site and on Maple Avenue, and the ability for them to put in units. They originally were warm to it, then they cooled off on it, they're a little bit warmer to it. And I suspect as they look at that, overall, the ability to attract doctors, the ability to attract nurses, the potential for a development like that to even throw off some income to offset that, I think is going to make an awful lot of sense than just allowing the private market to try to address all these issues. So we're looking at everything.
Thank you, Med.
Thank you. Counselor Giacomo?
Thanks. I think the important part here, too, is that 20% number. I mean, we're not talking about having to make the entire development at 80%, at 60,000 less per house. We're talking about 20% of the unit. So if you build a 10-unit development, 2 of them go for workforce rates in order to get this incentive. I don't think we're disincentivizing too aggressively. If we were saying the entire development had to be, absolutely. I think that's a ton of money off the table for a developer, but in order to get an extra building in there, you turn 2 of them, you drop the price of 2 of them by 20%. That doesn't seem like it's that bad of a mathematical situation. But
Well, I think if what we were hearing from our planner is correct, if that house could have sold for $500,000 and now we're asking that developer to sell it for $240,000, those 2 units could cost him $500,000, which he certainly would not make up on the 1 additional unit.
I think my point was that he would have 8 buildings at $500,000.
But he could have had 10 buildings at $500,000. So in order to get the 11th building, he would have to lose $500,000. So there's no incentive at that level.
If you're legitimately talking about double the price, yes. If you're talking the 500,000, yeah, that's where it starts to reach a tipping point. But if we're talking
Right.
for 350, 400,000, the math does work out.
But that's, and that's what was asking, is because I think that these numbers have shifted so drastically, so quickly, that I don't have my hand necessarily on the pulse of what these properties might be worth. And, and if that's accurate, if 475,000 is a builder grade house on a postage stamp lot, then this, in lowering that incentive for 1 unit for the developer to have to sell at $240 does not financially make sense for them. I think maybe we need to increase that density bonus to 2.
Yeah,
So-
I guess my point is that it's an option. We're providing this as an incentive. If they want to put that incentive in place, there are ways to make the math work. And we don't know that this house price trend that we're on for the last 24 months is going to continue. I think it seems unsustainable. I think it's related to pandemic. I'm not a realtor though, so don't quote me on any of it. But I don't know. I think we're making some assumptions that is going to be a price that is workforce to moving forward versus, I don't know. It doesn't, the math that doesn't work is for our workforce. that math does not work still. So I don't know, care what HUD says, it just doesn't, those numbers
Right.
don't work.
So my request would be to look at potentially increasing the density bonus. Was it 15%?
Yep, so we have, the workforce housing option already has a higher density bonus than the other two. It's
Okay.
15% is what we're proposing. And we're also proposing to increase the number of units per structure to 3 for the rural and
Okay.
low-density one. So if you'll recall, the permitted uses in rural and low-density right now under CRD are a single or duplex. We're proposing to increase it to 3. We could even look at potentially going up to maybe 4. I think that's pushing it a little bit, though, for the rural district, honestly. So that's why we suggested going up to a triplex, but that's another sort of incentive in terms of if you're putting all 3 units into one building, the cost per unit goes down. So our hope was that that would also help make it a little bit more affordable to do this.
Okay.
And I do just want to echo that I think right now, I don't think that we as staff have a good way to do the math for you, mostly because the market conditions are going to be constantly changing. If we had done this 2 years ago, it would have been a completely different conversation. So
So are you predicting that these will be put in as condos?
it could be either way. So actually, if I go to the next slide, we were proposing to have criteria for both owner-occupied and rentals. So they could be houses that are sold, they could be condos, they could be rentals. That would be an option as well. With the rentals, I put up there the 60%, which is the state definition, as well as 80% and 100%, just to give you a few options to look at in terms of what the affordable rent would be for a household of 3. But I can go back to the other slide if we want to. I think there, Madam Chair, I think Councilor Omerod has his hand
Oh, I'm
raised.
sorry. Councilor Ormerod, you're very tiny on our screen, so you can always just speak up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make sure that we don't short sell the benefit of income diversity in these developments. I think we've heard from the incoming planner that the solar incentive, kind of helps us with the high end. But if you have doctors and nurses coming in, you also need people in a community. It's highly advantageous to have people in a community who can watch the kids, do the babysitting, or would provide other services that even LNAs as well too. Perhaps we can do that through rental, but as Councilor Giacomo said, are we really giving up that much for 20% of the units? I don't know what the magic number is, when I think that we could have a competitive advantage by not building, super rich neighborhoods, but going for some income diversity.
Madam Chair, may I respond to that?
Yes, please.
This is making me remember, I think our planner, Evan Clements, had done some research into workforce housing ordinances that other communities have in New Hampshire, and I believe it was Exeter, New Hampshire, that actually has a model where they require 20% of the units to be workforce, but they define that as 15% are at a certain level and then 5% are at another level. So we could even go into that level of detail if that's something that we could propose with this as well, getting to the whole diversity of income levels in a development.
And just
Mary, is Exeter the only city in New Hampshire that put something like this in effect right now?
Nope, there's various different communities that have workforce housing ordinances in place. I know Dover does, Hollis, Jaffrey maybe might have one.
Yep, Jaffrey offers a density bonus similar to what we're proposing in their version of a conservation cluster development. A lot of communities do that, offer like a 5% bonus if you do X, Y, or Z in their cluster development. And the cluster development itself, the CRD, does offer some cost-saving mechanisms to the developer with like shorter roads, because you're just going into a little bit of the land and then the rest of it's being put into conservation. You don't have to lay a quarter mile of road down. Same story with the underground utilities, water, sewer, electric, internet. So by default, there are some cost-saving measures already implemented, but
So, yeah, I think the way, for example, that Exeter did it is they had 5% were set at like 80% of the area median income, and then the other 15 were 100% of the area median income. So it made it so that there were some of the more affordable workforce housing units in there, but the majority of the required workforce housing was at a higher level. So that's something that we could do as well, if that's something that this committee would really prefer to see.
Have they had any applications or done any projects?
I don't know off the top of my head. Are
I do
you
not know
aware?
the answer to that.
Okay.
If you'd like, we can definitely reach out to these communities, see how successful their programs have been. One other thing I'd like to add in regards to income diversity is some of the language that staff has proposed for the workforce housing portion of this is that the workforce housing units need to be the same like character and quality as the rest of the units in the project, and they need to be evenly dispersed through the project. So we don't want to offer these density bonuses and get 8 huge houses
Yeah, and two-
and then 2 little shacks like pushed off into the corner. That's not what we want. So it is going to have to be of all the houses need to be of an appropriate character for the project.
Great.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would like to see you look into that, to see if anyone has had an application yet, to see what they're facing. Or, maybe there might be some information they could pass on to us. But I would like that.
And I can send out, there's a report that's like a 10-year retrospective on the New Hampshire housing statute, and it looks at various different communities that have had a workforce housing ordinance and how it's worked out for them. So I can send that out to the committee if that would be helpful. There are definitely communities that have had applications come through under their workforce housing ordinances, and there's been mixed results. Like some of them, as a result of their workforce housing ordinance, they had an application come through, the community was not happy, so they went back and they revised their ordinance to be
Stricter.
less of an incentive, or to be more strict. So there's definitely some good lessons learned from that. I think where I struggled in reading through that was that there weren't that many developments that have come through, so it was hard to really get a good sense of what the ideal formula is, if that makes sense. But
I think-
I'd be happy to share that with the committee.
Yeah, Ridge-
Ultimately,
Ridge
I'd
had
like-
some success initially, but it also, speaking frankly, it kind of freaked the community out, and there was some negative reaction to that project. In the town I used to work in, Hollis, we had a townhouse development come in with workforce units. It was very atypical for the community, so there was a lot of opposition to the project. Ultimately, we did get a couple workforce units. Workforce housing in Hollis is very different than in Keene. Being a different region, those units were workforce restricted to about $450,000 for townhouse condos. The market rate units were only going for about $480,000, $500,000. So the restrictions that went along with the workforce units made them not super palatable to buyers. And this is 2020, 2021, so the demand was there. They eventually sold, don't get me wrong, but the market rates units sold before the ink was dry on the site plan.
Right. Yeah, and I think what I would be looking for is, like, we need to strike a balance. Obviously, I think that I don't want to build something that no one uses because it doesn't make sense for developer. I want people, I think Keene is looking to see some of these projects happen. So we need to have a project that works for consumers and a project that works for the developers, and find like what is the sweet spot.
I just have one other quick question. I don't suppose any builders have reached out to the planning department?
About this proposal?
Anything, yeah, like this?
No, because we haven't, this is our first time presenting this publicly. But I mean, we have heard from developers that are interested in the CRD subdivision option. We have one application that's before the planning board now, and I've heard of 2 other possible ones. I think one of them, was the Whitcombs Mill Road, which came through for a zoning change. I think that was stated publicly that they were looking at possibly doing a CRD subdivision with that parcel of land. So, but not specifically this workforce housing option, because that's nothing that Keene has we've never done anything like this
Right.
before in Keene.
Right.
So I'm not sure that it's even out there yet.
Right,
because-
but there are developers that are interested, so possibly we might get more interest if we,
Once we make it public.
yep.
Yep. So I think what I would like to get to this evening is I would like to get some consensus around what these percentages are, so staff can bring us back a version of an ordinance potentially. So we've got 2 numbers to look at. We have the sale price and we have the rental price. Councilor Giacomo, I know you've already stated some feelings. Are you comfortable with the 80% for sales price?
I think
Is
it's
that
certainly
what-
more reasonable.
That's-
I
or-
think the 80%, yeah, salaries are rising, which is good. So hopefully the median income will continue to rise faster than the house price, and that stays affordable.
Yep.
So yes,
Any other people on PLD side? Councilor Ormerod?
Yeah, thank you. I think 80% is reasonable, but I'm wondering if we raise that to the 265 that Councilor Giacomo mentioned, if there's any merit to doing that, or is that so small of a difference that it's not gonna do much?
What would 90% be? Do we know that number? Can we math real quick?
I'm not confident in my ability to do mental math, but it would be somewhere
She's-
between 80 and 100.
We have we have a computer right
We
there.
have, we also have an engineer that said it's somewhere around 275.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Just to clarify something, so we're talking about the price. It's not an arbitrary number. It's based on affordability for a family of 4.
Correct.
At 30% based on certain mortgage conditions. So I don't know. So I'm looking at 2022 numbers right now for HUD medium area income. Cheshire County, it says it's 89 now.
1,000?
That's the median area. So for a family of 4 at 80%, we're talking about 75,600
Would be the,
is
So-
is 80%. So that's the income
So-
for a family of 4.
right,
Well,
but
the 75,600 is I believe that's the income is that for the family of 4 or family of 3?
That's family of 4, that's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
But we need to identify affordable purchase prices for Cheshire County to move forward with this ordinance, potentially, right? So with all of those figures that we've just described as probably not being accurate, and no one is getting a 2.8% mortgage anymore, at 80% of HUD's median area income, they're saying that a family of 3 or 4 could afford a $240,000 house. If we're going to put that limit in there, then in order to get the density bonus, the developer would have to sell 20% of the units at that price. So is that a reasonable expectation that a developer would choose to lower their price to that in order to make the sale, or should it be at 90% or 100%? That's the question at hand. So yes, I understand that we're talking about an actual income for a family, but in a rental situation, that is going to have to be monitored regularly, I think, at least in the initial onset of the rental application, which we're going to have to create a mechanism for that. But in this particular, in the sales version of this, we've got to come up with what number we think is potentially appropriate. And this could be modified at any time as the market shifts, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we could come back and modify the definition if we find, 5 years from now, market conditions are drastically different and it makes no sense anymore. We could come back and change it. That's definitely a possibility.
Med, do you have something to add to my ranting?
Hopefully I won't make it worse. We as staff have discussed this quite a bit, and, absent writing a check to make up the difference, you have to put enough on the table where it's worthwhile for the developer, either in the first instance to develop the property and sell the units, or on an ongoing basis in the case of rental units. There just has to be enough on the table to make it worthwhile. This is a lens by which we define the bonus, right? But at the end of the day, there has to be enough rental income overall to cover the balance sheet. And, our thought process was if in a rental situation or a sale condo situation, if you can aggregate the buildings, your construction costs go down, that's to the benefit. And if you were able to get a density bonus to add more units to make up the shortcomings, as it were, that's to the good. So whatever number we choose is a lens, whether it's 80% or 120%, whatever makes sense from that standpoint. The other side of it is also the rental side.
Right.
What is your rental number? We've got a management mechanism, and Mary can talk about it. We think we've got that figured out. It's really just now of deciding how big is the bonus. Is it 20%?
Right.
Is it 25%? Is it 15%? Or is it a balance with the income levels to make that happen? Clearly, if you want to stimulate workforce housing around the city, and this is the first opportunity to have a conversation, if you really want developers to do it, if you want contractors to do it, they're in the business of making money.
Correct.
Quite frankly, they're not altruistic. So we're either going to write a check to make it happen, or we're going to have to make it to their benefit to make it happen. And we're trying to strike that balance.
Right. And that goes 100% back to all of the points that I've been making, because ultimately, we still have a capitalist economy where people are here to make money, and we've got to give them a reason to do this.
That's right.
And so the lower we go from and I want to clearly separate these two concepts, because the sale concept that a developer is going to build property to sell is much different than the rental concept. But in this concept, that if we reduce the amount to 80%, we might have to increase from 15 to 20% bonus to make that incentive worthwhile. If we were at 100%, 15% might make sense. That's that mathematical equation that we don't have magic numbers to fill in. There's also not enough housing available to even realistically be able to judge what a true market value for something is currently. But we've got to start somewhere. So tonight we've got to give staff some direction. Anyone on the planning side have any recommendations for staff on where they'd like to see this? This is from this house sale perspective. Yes, Harold?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, I think the fertile ground for workforce housing is probably going to be closer into the city in the different zones, or closer to the actual workplaces, the employers, like around the hospital, et cetera. So I think if we're out in the rural district, it's going to be the math will be tough for developers. So I'd be more inclined to go with a higher number
Of
for
the
the
higher
sale
number?
price. Yeah.
Anyone else? Counselor Giacomo?
Med was making me think about this, and the way that I'm also looking at this is, if these units are going to be filled by new people, or we're talking about the other alternative, which we talked about a little earlier, which is that people are moving from locations more in the core out to the rural districts, they present two very kind of different scenarios. The bottom line is, if we aren't incentivizing building workforce housing out there, workforce housing isn't going to get built. So either we don't have developers build
Correct.
any of these districts at all, or sorry, we don't have them build any with workforce housing at all because we make the number too high. In which
Too
case,
low.
too low rather, sorry, too low. And then we don't gain any workforce housing out there. Or we make it so attractive to them, and then we don't get anyone from the workforce actually moving out there, and we still have the same people without housing. So that's the kind of the conundrum. Either
Right.
way, it doesn't sound like, unless we make the incentives so good for the developers, and I don't, by the way, I think it's great. Make the number as high density bonus as you want. If you make it 20% density bonus, that's 20% more housing we have in Keene in this new development. I don't see that as a bad thing, regardless of what the income level is of those houses. That's more housing. But my longer term concern with this is that if we don't get workforce housing built here, then businesses that we have in this town are going to leave. And it is a serious, serious concern, and we're getting to an absolutely critical point with some of our manufacturers right now with hiring.
Right.
Businesses will not relocate here, and businesses that are here will close up shop if they cannot hire new people and have them have housing. So I understand the incentivization. I say we do it on the city side and increase the density bonus to whatever the commensurate value should be to offset the lower price for the workforce housing incentive. That's my, where the logic is following in my brain, at least on this.
So would staff be comfortable doing a 20% density increase and keeping that number at 80%?
That's something, I think the overall, we would still want to keep that overall density cap at 30%, but that's something we could do. I think it might honestly be necessary if we're going to go down to the 80%. It might actually be necessary to give a higher density bonus. I'm not entirely sure because I'm I'm also not a real estate agent and I can't predict the housing market, but it does seem like because of the high price that developers are able to get for houses and also the high price it is to just build anything right now, that might be what's needed. The other piece I just want to put out there, make sure everyone understands, is this menu of incentives is for the CRD regulations, and it would be available to the low density and low density 1 districts as well as the rural district. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Like, this is something that could be done in low density 1 or rural.
No, that's a really good point, because I
there's
think
not a
we've all approached this from the rural district.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because there's not, to my knowledge, there's not a ton of parcels out there in the low-density district that are,
Waiting for development.
waiting to have a big development on them. But just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay. Roberta?
Well, the numbers from 2021 to 2022 changed so much. And inflation.
Yes.
I just don't know. Obviously, the low 80% is the number, and 20%, no.
Yeah. I agree. I tend to agree. Right. And I think that what we need to do is, put a giant, return to, in this chapter, in 12 months and see where we're sitting in the, early summer of 2023. If things have cooled off and have changed, then maybe those numbers need to be adjusted accordingly. We'll have tested the waters maybe a little bit and see if we've had some responses with applications from developers and see what the palette is for the menu of items that we've given. But if you're comfortable capping everything at 30%, I would say increase the workforce housing to 20%, and then they would have one option of increasing additional conservation land or solar, which you're probably not going to see the solar and the workforce go together to get to 30%.
I mean, one thing I will say with the solar and the workforce is the solar is just 50% of the lots and the workforce is only 20% of the units. So I do
So
think
they
it
could
could
do
be
the
done.
solar on the additional 80%, 50% of the 80%. You're going to have to think about how that would work. But But yes, okay, so that would get them to back to the 30%. Counselor Jones?
Can I just ask a procedural question? This is a draft that came to us. Thank God it's not part of a codified document.
Yeah.
But when we come up with a solution that we think is right, and then it's going to go to council, is it going to be part of a codified document, or are they going to get a draft?
Yeah, so the intention tonight was to get feedback from you all, and then from this committee, and then our hope was to be able to file the ordinance tomorrow. However, if you as a committee feel like this needs more time in the pre-ordinance phase, we can do that. But our goal was to submit an ordinance tomorrow for first reading at City Council this week.
So if you submit an ordinance, then it's codified,
I think
and then you get an amending process going crazy when people
Yeah.
have different opinions. I don't know if we're ready for that.
That's good to hear from you, because then we can hold off another month and come back to you with some more information and make
I'd
sure that we
rather
get this
keep it as a
right.
draft
Yeah.
right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Counselor Jones, what was your concern for keeping it as a draft?
If it gets sent to council tomorrow night as a first reading, it's going to be a codified ordinance, and everyone's going to be doing, everyone has different opinions on this already, so it's going to take an amendment process for every little change that somebody wants, instead of if it comes as a draft. If we continue to work on it as a draft, we can work it out better, I think, instead of having it codified by tomorrow and sent to council, where it's going to be amended back and forth, I think.
Well, my concern is that I would like to see this move as quickly as possible to create development opportunities as quickly as possible. The sooner we create this change, the sooner we open up the opportunity for developers to look at this and have this as a consideration. I mean, we're still talking for this to get through council, for somebody to create a plan, to go to the planning board, to get approval, to break ground, and to have someone open a door to their home is probably 2 years from now. We're talking about our companies leaving today. Like, I feel like our two questions here revolve around these percentages. And if we can come to some sort of consensus as a group tonight about what we think those percentages need to be, I have not heard from this group a lot of questions regarding the meat of the rest of what staff has presented. Does anybody disagree with that? Counselor Giacomo?
I agree with Councilor Jones. I mean, if we're talking 2 years out, what's another month going to make to save the hassle of having to amend something? You keep it as draft for one more month and then send it to council. It makes a lot more sense to me. Again, it's a procedural thing. We don't have developers knocking down our doors.
Well, they don't have these opportunities.
Okay, I mean, but we heard that the other communities, anyways, all right. I don't think realistically, in the next month, we're going to have suddenly people knocking down our doors because we have this ordinance moved faster by a month. I don't know. I agree with Councilor Jones on this.
I
though.
guess I would like to understand what the concern for the amendments are besides these percentages. Counselor Johnson?
Yes, my question is, why couldn't we send it back to these folks, let them compile whatever, hearing after all this, if we gave you any beneficial input, and then is there another city council meeting in June? I know there's one
Not
this week.
before our joint committee our next joint committee meeting would be in July, and the following council meeting, I'm not sure if we would have one post if that's when council is on break. So
Should we have another
we might
joint
not
committee
see this
meeting
go
set
back
up?
into council until August. I'm
Should
sorry?
we have another joint committee set up so that we could come back to it?
That would depend on our notification protocol and what staff's availability would be.
Madam Chair, just to put it out there, so one of the constraints with timing is that the public workshop requires a 10-day notice, and that doesn't include the day the notice is posted or the day of the meeting. So it's really a 12-day notice. So this, if we wanted to go to the July joint committee meeting, for example, we'd have to bring it to city council this week. If we wanted to go to the August joint committee meeting, we'd have to bring it to the, I believe, the first meeting in July, because is the second one the summer vacation, I believe. So there's just, it's, if we don't submit tomorrow, it's not, going to delay it by months and months, but it would probably delay it by at least a month and a half or 2 months.
Madam Chair? Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Counselor Ormerod?
Oh,
Just 1 second.
okay.
Counselor
Oh.
Ormerod?
Thank you. I actually think that we should put some numbers out there and bring it to the council for them to react to. And I think because we've gone through all this, and this is the most controversial stuff for us, you could couch the discussion that say, hey, these are the reasons we're doing all these things. And you could say, this is where we think we want to start. I think it's a little bit easier for people to react to numbers, even if they don't have the context to it. So I would favor putting the numbers out there, and I think the higher numbers for the density and a reasonable number, I don't know if it's 90 or 100%. I think I would approve that, prefer that.
Thank you, Counselor. I think he's suggesting that we put some numbers in here and move it forward to see what the reaction is.
Okay, so I'm in line with you. I agree. I think this needs to move forward. I just don't, I see it going longer than a month and longer than 2 months, especially with council being on. I mean, we brought this here tonight because we are in crisis mode for housing, and I just don't think it should be delayed. I mean, the council will have time to discuss what they want and add amendments. I mean, they've added amendments for years, so I'm in favor of moving this on.
Yeah.
I really am. I just don't think we should put it off any longer, to be honest with you. I think the staff has done an incredible amount of work on this, and I have heard very few people complain about much of anything that's what's been proposed, so I'm fully in favor of moving this on.
Okay.
I agree with you.
David?
Yes, I'd like to ditto to that I'm in favor of moving forward as well.
Okay.
I've listened to a lot of what we've just talked about this evening. I keep it quiet. I'm in the real estate business. I don't want to offer too much of my expertise on that at this point, but
Right,
I
it's
agree
so
with moving forward.
rapidly changing. Okay. Anyone else from the planning side have an opinion about whether they'd like to see it stay here for another month or move it forward? Counselor Giacomo? Sorry.
Talk with my hands, sorry. Sometimes I literally talk with my hands. No, I did forget about council break, and the workshop does make some sense with the timing wise, so I'm good with that. I did have a mathematical question that I was curious about through this, and I'm sorry to bore people. When we do the calculations for the bonuses, are those, for instance, if you do a 20% bonus on 10 units, you get 12 units now, suddenly no longer are 20% of your units housing, workforce housing. So are the percentages that you require before the incentive is added or after the incentive is added?
Good question.
It would be, the 20% includes the, any units added through any density bonus.
Okay.
So if somebody were to take 2 different density bonus options and they have a total of a 30% density bonus, they'd have to do 20% of the total number of units, including all the units from the density bonus, have to be workforce. Same thing with the 50% solar. That's 50% of the total after they get all of their bonuses.
Great.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Counselor Johnson?
Thank you. This is amazing, all this conversation. My head is spinning. What do you need from us, Madam Chair? You need a motion?
Not quite. We are going to just give staff some direction, and they're going to submit potentially a draft ordinance to council for first reading at our next meeting. But what
This week?
This week.
Okay.
But what I need from you guys today are, it sounds like we're looking at 80% or 90%, we need to choose, and a 20% density bonus for workforce housing from a sale in the sales department. So if everyone's comfortable with the 20%, we'll move forward with that. We just need to decide if we're going to stick with 80% or 90%. I've heard arguments for both.
I'm in favor of the 80%.
80%?
That's where I started, and
Do
I
we have
think-
consensus 80%? Okay. So I would say that's good direction for staff for those. And then can we just move to the rental slide?
Yep, if it'll, there we go.
There we go. So here, what we're looking at is the HUD median area income at 60%. A two-bedroom unit would be capped at $1,130. This is if a developer were to rent out these units. And if we went to 80%, that same unit would be capped at $1,510. I don't think a $1,500 unit is really affordable for a two-bedroom. I would maybe be comfortable somewhere in between at 70%.
Yeah, I think the 60% is what the state defines as workforce.
Okay.
So those numbers are out there. It's not as difficult on the rental side to calculate what the numbers are because it's a more straightforward calculation. But it would be somewhere between the 60 and 80 that you see on the screen there.
So 60 is traditionally workforce housing?
That's how the statute defines workforce housing when it comes to rentals, and that's the gross monthly rent, so including utilities.
Okay. So is everyone comfortable with that number? And that would be 20% of the units would have to be rented at that? Yes.
At the 70 you suggested?
The 70 would put it slightly above workforce housing. That would come in, I'm going to ask Counselor Giacomo to do my math here, but I'm going to guess right around the $1,300 mark.
No, well, you said, is everyone happy with that? Is that the 70%? Is that what you're asking?
60% is traditional workforce housing.
Okay.
If we bump it up to 70, it would put a two-bedroom unit with all utilities included at around $1,300, which is still significantly lower than what market rents are currently.
I'd like to stay at 60%.
60%?
Yes, because
I
it's
see.
going to the council anyway, so they're going to be having plenty of discussion around it. But I think this is a good place to start.
More realistic, but 60,
Would
Yep.
actually benefit, true.
Yep.
Okay, I see a lot of nodding heads. Yep, 60%. Okay,
That's fine.
okay.
Thank
I
you.
don't
We did
That
it.
was a lot.
See? I knew we could get through it.
Thank you, Mary. I
Thank
know
you.
that was a lot of work.
Whew, all right, but that's not it. Don't everybody pack up just yet, because we have one more item on our agenda this evening. And I don't have my agenda in front of me.
Accessory
No,
dwelling
do we
units.
have our actual agenda? Thank you. So item number 4 is some new business that I had asked to have a conversation start here at the Joint Committee. This is in regards to accessory dwelling units. We actually heard staff talk about this as potential for an increase in number of units in rural districts and what accessory dwelling units are available to people under certain conditions. And I hope that we could get some information about what those conditions currently are, and then we can talk about how we might like to see that get changed. Do we have someone to give us a little bit of a brief? John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, currently the city does have an accessory dwelling unit, allowance for any of our districts that allow single-family homes. Just a little bit of background, the city actually was a little bit ahead of the curve. We allowed accessory dwelling units in the low-density district back in the mid-2000s, I believe, was when that was instituted. 2017, the state did change one of their RSAs that required municipalities to allow accessory dwelling units in all districts that allow single-family homes. So at that time, the city did go through and we changed ours and opened it up to high-density, medium-density, low-density, rural, agricultural districts. Some of the conditions that are currently in place that are, again, allowed by the state RSA is that in order to do the ADU, one of the units needs to be owner occupied. Doesn't dictate if it's the larger or the smaller unit. There is a deed restriction that needs to be put into place. One of the benefits to the ADU is in some of the other districts that allow multifamilies, where you have a density factor that you have to apply for square footage of the lot. With an ADU, you're not allowed to do that. The state RSA prohibits you from doing that. So currently, if I have a single-family home that is a non-conforming lot, so let's say in the low density where a 10,000 square foot lot is required, even if I have a house that's on a non-conforming lot of, so let's say 5,000 square feet, I can still put an ADU, where previously under our code, there was a density factor and you would not have been able to do it. So that was certainly a benefit for many of the smaller, tighter neighborhoods. We currently only allow in most all the districts that are single-family attached dwelling units, accessory dwelling units. The one place we do allow for the detached is out in the rural and the agricultural districts. One of the thoughts there was that in most of the single-family districts, to end up having two separate structures with dwelling units in them didn't really quite seem to fit the districts where just a single dwelling unit was being allowed. But while we were allowing two in the same building, it seemed to stay with the character of what was being allowed in that neighborhood. We chose to allow the detached out in the rural and agricultural, with the thought process that a lot of those might be some bigger houses that had, maybe a farmhouse that had a barn that was detached that somebody could convert into that accessory dwelling unit. So that's kind of where we had gone with that. I know that there's been a minimum size that was really just brought forth from our previous ordinance of 400 square feet is the minimum size.
Is it the minimum or the maximum?
The 400 is the minimum size that you need to create. The maximum for any of the detached would be 800 square feet.
Okay.
Is the maximum size. Out in the rural and agricultural with the detached, you can go up to 1,000, or as long as you stay less than 50% of the main primary dwelling unit, you would be able to do that, whichever one is greater. So with that, there's certainly some things that we're going to be looking at for some changes to that. One of the things that I know that has been talked about is that 400 minimum. That is certainly something that we're looking at, because the building code is really going to dictate what size a dwelling unit needs to be anyway. There are certain specific sizes that you would have to apply to a dwelling unit, which would fall under that 400. So technically, you could build an ADU that's probably be getting in probably around the 300 square foot range to meet the building code. So that's one thing that we're currently looking at, and certainly would, when we bring it before the staff, there's probably be some other changes there as well. But we just, as is evident, we're trying to move things, multiple things through, kind of one right after the other, to try and, as I think the chair mentioned, that trying to take advantage of the market the way it is right now, that people are probably looking to do some sort of developments. This is certainly one that somebody might want to be able to do. So we would certainly be bringing that back to the committee.
So one of the reasons that I had an interest in talking about this is I felt like this was an easy way for us to add housing density to our community quickly. That wasn't going to be a 2-year process, right? And so we were talking about how can we add housing stock. Councilor Williams is here this evening. He had also sent me a copy of a letter that he had sent into the Housing Stability Committee, which is a new committee that the mayor had set up at council to look at some of the issues that have been brought forward by several councilors in regards to homelessness and housing inavailability, and what we can do in order to make some shifts in our community. So I think one of the things that I heard you say, and one of my biggest areas where we might be able to make an impact, because these ADUs are already being allowed in the city, and they're, I think, having those, my concern was that the 400 was a maximum requirement. As long as that's a minimum and that they're allowed to be larger, like a 1-bedroom in-law apartment is sort of what I'm imagining, right? So the only thing that I heard is that we don't have an opportunity in the central part of the city for these to be detached. And I know several people who have tried to put apartments over their detached garages for their mother or for their kid. And, we tend to be moving into a housing market where we are going to see families cohabitate together like this now. Parents their adult children are having children, and maybe they can't afford the $500,000 house. So they're creating some sort of accessory dwelling unit so they can all cohabitate, and you're going to have generations living together. And so why restrict ADUs to having to be attached in the city? I don't have any real significant reason that I can think of to do that. Mr.
Just
Rogers?
a couple things. So, since the mid-2000s until, 2017, when the state changed made the municipalities change their requirements, we probably have had a handful of ADUs, and then even after the state changed theirs and opened it up to all the other districts, again, I can probably, all the ADUs that have been permitted within the city, I can probably count on both hands. I mean, it's not a large demand for this. And then again, I think the only thing I would caution against this for two reasons for the detached anywhere is going to be that that means I can go ahead and add if I live in the low density, which is traditionally single dwelling unit per lot, I can go ahead without any density factor on my size of my lot. I can build another separate building and have two separate primary dwelling units basically on that lot. And that's why we did not go to the detached, because for that concern that if, again, since there's no density factor, I can squeeze in another whole building on a lot that should be, or is in a more of a single dwelling unit per lot district. And that was why we did not recommend back in 2017 to go to and include the detached in those more dense type districts.
So we would allow detached garages on those lots?
As a garage, but again, technically, if you were to allow for another detached dwelling unit, you could ultimately have two detached dwelling units, two detached garage. You could end up having 4 different structures on a lot that, again, I think that the impact of a garage compared to a residential unit on a lot is certainly a lot less than having a whole nother dwelling unit on there. So that was the main reason we looked at it, as we got closer into the core of the city, is trying to maintain the feel of the different districts that are there. And again, the fact that there's no density factor for that extra dwelling unit also magnifies the impact and the density of those smaller neighborhoods.
So you envision allowing detached ADUs as potentially having 2 garages?
I'm not envisioning that at all. I'm just saying that once you open that door, the possibilities are that, again, that people are going to start to maximize some of these lots that are already could be pretty tight in a district that is meant to be a little bit less intense.
Okay. And my understanding was that accessory dwelling units was capped at least maybe in the more urban areas, high density, medium density, that they were capped at 650 square feet. Is that accurate or not accurate?
No, and again, it would be the same. Right now, it's the same for any of the attached accessory dwelling units. It's the 400 to 800 range is what
So they
is
can be
allowed.
up to 800
It
square
could be
feet
up to 800.
in
correct.
the high density.
In
in
high,
any of them.
medium,
Any of
low,
those.
any of them. Other until you get out to the rural or the agriculture, then it bumps up to possibly to 1,000.
To 1,000. Okay, so I just wanted to open up this conversation tonight. Does anyone else want to have anything to add? Counselor Jones?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for bringing this forward. I think this is the quickest answer to start the ball rolling on helping our housing issues. I can't wait till my kids let me move in,
I keep
I
trying
can
to get
sell
my
my place
mother-in-law to
and-
move in.
When you work like that, I think
It's a good start,
It is a good
and
start.
I thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Counselor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have definitions? I guess this is for John. Do we have definitions for primary use? So would it be possible to allow exterior ADUs on the non-rural lots if it has a primary use other than an ADU? So for instance, if it has a primary use as a garage established, we would allow conversion into an ADU, however, would not allow new construction of a building that's primary use was as a dwelling unit. Is that something that would be possible to do to try to get around the,
With a variance, I believe.
with a variance, but it could be,
Could we make it by right?
could we codify that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, that,
Counselor Ormerod? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a lot of people in my network that are involved in telemedicine, telehealth, home health services, besides Counselor Bosley. And everyone is telling me the same thing. There's going to be, and there's starting to be, a huge demand for at-home services as opposed to going into nursing homes or assisted living where diseases spread pretty quickly. That's one of the things we learned from COVID. So I think we really need to find a way to make the ADUs work. I think that's pretty important for us to get moving on this and work through the issues.
Great.
I just have a quick comment.
Pamela?
With the hour approaching, like, we're getting here close
Yeah.
to 9 o'clock here, and I know it's been a long day for everybody, especially me. But anyway, John, thank you for bringing this forward. I would like to see this come forward at a future meeting. I'd like to hold off a little bit more on the discussion, only because we've just kind of tapped on it tonight. And while we're talking about accessory dwelling units, I've been talking about tiny houses, which are basically the same thing, for probably 15 years, which was never brought to the council. So, to me, they're very similar. And I don't know if that would make a difference or not. What's the difference between ADUs and tiny houses? And I'm not asking you for a response tonight, because I think this is something that needs to come back to the joint committee. But I appreciate you bringing this forward tonight.
Great. And I would like to just address Counselor Williams' letter. Would you like to speak to us in regards to your letter that you've sent in?
Thanks. I won't go on at length because of the hour, but I do want to say thank you for addressing this letter. The ad hoc committee on housing stability is also looking at this issue, and the goal here is really to bring in new units, especially at the lower end of the housing ladder, so that people with not too many options can move into a converted garage, or can move into maybe their sister's ADU in the basement, or something like that. What can we do to make this kind of thing possible? And so thank you for your consideration of this tonight.
Thank you. All right, so I think maybe it would make sense for staff to come back at the next meeting with some ideas or some suggestions about how we might be able to open this store up. And even if it's part of it is like an educational component, I know we've done a lot of that this is something that is available for folks, and that it is, that is their right to have these units in their homes, that they can, I don't know what our mechanisms are to educate the public, but and tweak the rules here a little bit so that we can, we're not necessarily looking at trying to have a second home built on a lot separate from the home that's sitting there. But just let's not prevent people or make it difficult or make them go through months of going through zoning meetings and getting variances in order to have their kids live above their garage. That's ideally what I'd like to see, is just the whole process streamlined and made easy and convenient. And with that, our last item on the agenda is just to let everyone know that our next meeting is Monday, July 11th. And with that, thank you everyone for hanging in here with us, and the meeting is adjourned.